So, what are some of the typical problems we encounter when creating walk cycles? So, these are pencil tests. And what we are looking for at this stage is little pops and hiccups in the animation, things that seem like they don't quite line up. What that indicates is that the drawings are not fully connecting in the sequence. And so we can then isolate those drawings and figure out how to fix the animation. So starting here with the contact pose, when we move through the sequence slowly, I can see more clearly kind of what is happening with the feet. First of all, there's a lot of variation in the volume and the shape. So we want to tie that down a bit. We also have a problem with the foot not really feeling like it's on the ground, and this affects the character's sense of weight. Now, if I was going to draw a guideline for the ground, now what we can see is we can see that on some frames, the foot dips below that line as though it was going under the ground. And then on other frames, the foot actually pops up above like it's floating in the air. And that disrupts this feeling of the character's weight. Now, the other thing that I'm noticing is that the foot is sliding back a little bit here, but then we get to a point where it doesn't slide at all, like in these frames. And then suddenly it makes a big jump back to the center of the passing pose here. And then we have another big jump there. And so instead of having even sliding happening throughout every single frame, we get a couple big jumps back and then almost no movement whatsoever. So that's another thing that we want to address. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to revisit the position of the timing chart. So where's our passing pose? There's our passing pose right here, right about in the middle. So that looks right. That looks right. Those key poses are in the right spot. It's just the in-betweens that are the problem. If we do our standard breakdown, and now if we follow this guide, then we should be able to line up the drawings and get a much smoother look for the feet. So while we are adjusting this, what we also want to do is we want to try and maintain consistency in the shape of the foot. So using our onion skins as a reference. So here we can see that in this frame number 2, the foot should really be back here. Should have slid back a little bit. And at this point, we really want to see a flat bottom to the foot. So every place that the foot is touching the ground and pressing into it, you want kind of a nice hard flat line. And we should probably just check that we're staying on model. Looks like my drawing's a little bit wonky on that one. And here we are at the passing pose, right? Getting the foot locked into the ground and sliding back every single frame at the same rate is going to make a big difference in whether or not you can keep your limb length consistent. Because if the foot is in the wrong place, you're going to have to start stretching out the length of the limb in order to actually connect it properly to the body. So you can see here where the foot is supposed to be, and then suddenly it sort of jumps all the way back here. But actually, it really needs to be back here. You can see also that in order to connect the foot to the body, this leg has had to be stretched out much more than it really should be. And at this point, we're probably going up on the toes. But when we go up on the toes, of course, that connection to the ground still needs to be really solid. So while there can be shape to the rest of the foot, like that, you really want to see the connection to the ground as a hard line. And we are back to the contact pose. So here you can see that the foot's sliding back much more smoothly. And of course, this same thing needs to happen with this other foot. Oh, and it looks like there's actually a swapped frame in there. Watch out for those. So you can see the leg just suddenly switch. That can happen very easily in the tracing process if you are tracing the second step and you just forget to switch the legs. Let's look at another example. So here we can see sort of a more complex character, but I'm seeing a little bit of the same problems happening here in the feet. It's subtler, but I'm seeing that wobble in the shape of the feet and also in how it is connected to the ground. Let's look at this frame by frame. So here's our contact pose, and let's draw a ground line. And now this person has offset their feet by a little bit, so you actually end up having two ground lines. So in this scenario, the foot closest to the camera is going to slide along the red ground line, and the foot further away from the camera is going to slide along the orange ground line. And that gives the feet a little bit of separation in perspective. But when we go through frame by frame, you can see we have similar problems in that in this first step, the foot is not sliding at all. And then it suddenly jumps back into that next key pose and into the passing stage. And then it's really not sliding very much at all here either. And then it slides a little bit going back, right? So that's the sort of thing that we need to, again, plot out what the spacing is going to look like. So for each frame, the foot needs to slide back one of these. My spacing's not very even there. I should be a little more precise about that. There we go. Same thing is happening with the foot pressing into the ground, as you can see. So we started out here with this really nice contact right on this line, and also over here. And as the foot comes down, it's really dipped a lot below that ground line. And so we don't get the sense of it being locked into a specific part of the ground. And here it sort of jumped up a little bit better through those frames. But if we look at this one, here we have, the contact pose. The second contact pose is way down here. And so as we watch that front foot slide forward, here it's above the line. Here it's way below the line, and here it's on the line, and then it jumps above again, and so on and so forth. So the same thing that we did with the other one, we would want to do with this one as well. Okay, so here's one more that we can look at. So here we see a lot of pops as well. The head shape is really nice and consistent. So if we go through this frame by frame, you can kind of see that even though there is this nice ground line, the ground line is actually redrawn every single frame, and it's jumping around quite a bit. And so while the bottom of the feet have that nice sort of flat connection to it, because the ground line is jumping up and down, we're still getting this sense of wobble. There is also a problem with the slide of the foot. You can see that on frame 1, the foot is here, the next one, the foot is here, and then the next one here. So we've gone 1, 2, 3. And that doesn't quite work, right? And here is number 4. So we're also missing some in-betweens. And the spacing, if we plot it out, is really inconsistent. So that's the sort of thing that you need to clean up if you want to get a really nice foot slide and the sense of heaviness as your character steps onto the ground. Let's look at a couple more here. With this one, what we are seeing is there's still a little bit of an issue with the same things going on in the foot. But one of the main things that I'm seeing is that the foot is pushing up onto the toes too soon. So if we step through this frame by frame, we can see that the passing pose is actually the last frame where the foot is firmly planted on the ground, and then it already is starting to go up into its toes in the next frames. And so by the time we get to the high point, she's really kind of pushed off all the way, and there's nothing left for the remainder of the walk cycle. One thing that is really nice about this particular walk cycle is this beautiful overlapping action in the hair. As you can see, the hair feels very much attached to the up and down movement of the head. And that's because as we are moving upwards, there's this really nice stretch happening. So the head is going up, but the hair is still continuing down. So the motion is sort of offset. And it feels like the head is pulling the hair upward. And then when we get up to the top of the high point and start to go down, we get this kind of nice offset motion where the hair is still moving upward with its momentum as the head starts moving down. Okay, here's another one. So we have some nice rubber hose style animation going on with the legs, and that's looking all right. There's a few little pops that I think could be fixed, but the main thing that I want to talk about in this one is the consistency and volume of the body shape. So the in-betweening doesn't quite connect the shape of the body to make it really stand out as being more like a water balloon. So as we hit the contact pose and go into the low, what we should see is that same offset movement that we saw in the hair of the other character, right? So as the body starts to push up, we'd actually want to see this weight and the shape to deform towards the bottom as you get into that low point, but then to also overshoot as the legs start pushing up. As we reach the high point, overshoots by a little bit to kind of give it the feeling of something loose inside squashing and stretching it out. Getting into a few more nuanced critiques here. This walk cycle is working pretty well. We have a nice slide of the foot, good connection with the ground. One thing I am noticing, though, is that the length of the legs is changing a little bit as it bends. And also there's this slight feeling of not being balanced. This is a good walk cycle where if you were to take your hand and cover up the legs and just look at the upper body, you would see some really nice fluidity. And you would also see this great perspective in the rotation of the hand and shoulder. Some really nice foreshortening going on there. If you cover up the top half of the body and just look at the legs, you see that things are kind of angled a little bit backwards, right? So if we get to some of these poses here, there's this leaning back, particularly here, where we don't really get a sense of the character actually putting their weight onto this leg here. So what we're seeing here is if you compare the length of the leg in this long, extra stretched out contact pose to the length of the leg in the passing pose, you will notice that it's actually a fair bit shorter. And what we're lacking is we're lacking some up and down movement from the body, particularly because this contact pose is so wide. The wider your legs are, the lower your upper body is going to be to the ground. So either in this contact pose, the upper body needs to actually sit quite a bit lower, or when we get to the passing pose, the upper body needs to be quite a bit higher. And you could really go either way, but that's just going to mean an adjustment in the length of the leg regardless. Because we're trying to cram the legs in this little space here, we end up getting kind of this like off balance tilt to the lower body. What we would really want is we would really want to have a little bit more weight planted on that body. And then also, if you notice how short this back leg has become, that's going to really be more back out here. So you have a much more balanced stance between the legs, and the center of gravity is right in the center there. So here's one that's looking pretty good so far. One thing that I am noticing is I'm noticing there's a little bobble happening here in the head. So let's go through frame by frame and see if we can figure out where that's happening. So we can see the head's going up, and then it goes down, and then, oh, there it is. So we see that while everything else is pretty functional as far as the legs and the arms and everything swinging, the direction of the head as we move from frame to frame here, it goes up, then it starts to go down on this frame, and then it goes up again, and then it goes down once more, and then it starts its descent with the rest of the body. So it's just a couple frames that make that difference, but you can really see it as this little kind of strobing effect happening at the top of the head that distracts from really what's a very nice walk cycle. One more, and here also is a really nice walk cycle. We've got great sliding of the feet. There's a little bit of inconsistency in their shape that could be cleaned up in the final version, but the leg length is looking pretty good. There's a nice sort of up and down movement of the body. But what I am seeing is I'm seeing that the overlapping action of the head actually doesn't align with the up and down movement of the body because it's not offset and dragging behind a little bit. For example, as the body drops here to the low point, the head is dropping, but because this part of the head over here is further away from the center pivot point, it's actually going to be tilted upward while the head is dropping, and then it's going to reach its lowest point a few frames after the body reaches its lowest point. And what that will do is it will just give the body a feeling of a little bit more flexibility. We have beautiful flexibility happening in the ears. Those are kind of all working. But this is why it's good to have different body parts on different layers, because you could take that animation and just shift it by a couple frames and everything would suddenly pop into place. Look for those little pops, those little hiccups, those little things that feel like strobing, because those are your indication that you need to go back and examine those frames. Look for the arcs, look for the consistency in the volume and the length of different body parts, and you'll be able to tighten up that walk cycle and really start to polish it.